Hey everyone, what's up? It's James Makes Clothes. We are grading a sweatshirt pattern today. I've got all my pattern pieces ready to go. It is a sweatshirt crew neck pattern. And you'll see the method that I do for this pattern grade. We're grading it upsized this time, so I have an extra small. We're grading it to a small. Please like and subscribe to my channel. That would be awesome. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the pattern pieces. It's a very simple one. We're not going to make it too complicated. Here I've got my neckband, I've got my front, back, a waistband, and a cuff. And these are going to be made with ribbing, all the banding. And you can see I've drawn my grade lines on, and different grade lines indicate how you're going to cut the pattern out. So because I have the grain line in the center, that means I'm going to lay this flat. If you have a grain line that's a little squiggly, like pointing to the edge arrow that I just indicated, that means you're cutting it on the fold. So that's just a brief introduction to that. You can see I can either fold my waistband in half and cut it on the fold, or cut it straight out because it's just a rectangle. So I have lenience, and then here we have the on fold, cut on fold grain line indication. So we will be applying those to our fresh pattern. I like to go over the grain lines. They're quite important, especially if you're trying to line up patterns or knits. And cutting on the fold also helps if you're just cutting one piece. For a finished pattern though, sometimes you want the piece to be laid out flat. If you're going to send that in to be made, obviously that's going to be really important. But you can see I've got half a body piece, a full sleeve piece, and then half a back piece. So if I wanted to, I could make these patterns into full flat pieces so I wouldn't have to cut them on the fold. That would only matter if I was going into production with these. So let's talk about our supplies now. Obviously you need your roll of paper because pattern drafting requires lots of paper. We have to trace and then retrace and alter. And so save all your scraps. Make sure you have a mechanical pencil so that your lines are nice and crisp. You don't want to misinterpret your line measurements by having too thick of a pencil line. So that's why I use mechanical pencils only. Then you'll want a really nice quilting ruler, which I have on the top of the screen, a black marker and a red marker to label your patterns. And don't forget the paper scissors. They're very important. You do not want to dull your fabric scissors. I keep a smaller quilting ruler on hand as well, so I can grab that when I need, and make sure all my corners are sharp and right angles are lined up perfectly. Get that quilting ruler handy. If you don't have one, you need at least a right square, like a right angle square. However, I recommend quilting rulers for sure, especially for grading your patterns. And these are all done with imperial measurements. Don't forget to get your tape measure as well. You need a flexible tape measure to measure the armhole and the neck hole and the sleeve cap. That's very important for pattern drafting. Your pattern, don't forget, should also have grain lines applied to it. We're going to talk about those in a second. Stay tuned. So essentially, when you're grading patterns, or when you're designing patterns, I should say, patterns are basically designed on an XY axis. So if you think about math and you think about geometry, the XY axis, graphs, that sort of thing, a pattern is essentially graphed onto an XY axis. So that is your right angle. We need to make sure that XY axis is a complete 90 degrees. So this is where your quilting ruler comes in handy, or your right angle. Now, I've taken my pattern, which I've cut along the grain lines. I'm going to lay that out, that one cut piece, and we're going to trace it. Now, this is the sleeve. So we're grading from the center of the sleeve so that the grade is symmetrical and the sleeve is growing in each direction. So that means I'm grading this sleeve on the X and Y axis in the center, and that is the center of the sleeve. So trace out your first piece, which should be the centered either to the top or the bottom. I've chosen the top of the sleeve. And then we are going to add our outside pieces, but you can see, like a puzzle almost, I'm able to widen the sleeve where I need it wider, and then I place my sleeve piece onto the new line, or the new grain line, which I've just expanded. So what I've done is I've added 1/4 of an inch to that grade line, and then I'm drawing the elbow line in. That elbow line is also a grade point. And the 2 vertical grade points that I'm actually increasing right now, I've chosen those. Those aren't a standard location, but I've chosen 2 grade points because one is for the front of the sleeve and one is for the back of the sleeve. And you can see I'm adding my 1/4 inch because I've chosen to extend the front and the back of the sleeve by 1/4 inch. And I'm laying my front part of the sleeve on, factoring in that 1/4 inch space. And this is my new grade pattern, or my grade line rather. And I weigh it down and I trace it out. So you can see this is like a manual way to grade a pattern that you can do at home. And it's pretty foolproof. I will get into the grade lines in another video so that I can go more in depth to it and what I'm doing with these grade lines. But what I'm showing you here is how to expand or enlarge your pattern based on these grade lines. So I've chosen the length of my total garment to be 1 inch. So from an extra small to a small, my garment increases by 1 inch. And so I'm indicating that in the sleeve here with that 1 inch section at the elbow line. Once I've extended that sleeve down, I can now focus on doing the bottom part of my sleeve. The outside, the bottom cuff point that I'm doing right now, that already has that 1/4 vertical grade applied. So now that I've traced out my pieces of my sleeve into the larger sleeve, I now go over my lines with my ruler to make sure everything is sharp. Keep in mind that this pattern already had seam allowance in it, so I don't actually have to add the seam allowance after I'm done with this line, relining the pattern. So I'm just going over, making sure everything's nice and sharp, especially the angles. Once I've done that, I label my pattern always with the new size. So it's the sleeve, and now it is a size small. I've determined that my size small grade is what I've determined it to be. Standard sizes are listed in the method for pattern grading book. You can refer to those. I've created these based on the length that I want. So label the front of the sleeve and the back of the sleeve just for general practice, because my pattern is different in the front and the back. Once you're done that, you can cut it out. So now we have our sleeve pattern. And moving on to the front of the pattern. So I'm laying out my pattern, my original extra small pattern. You can see my original piece, and you can see the second piece that I've traced, drawn my grade lines on, and I've cut almost like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm drawing my XY axis, and because this is the front and the front has been cut on the fold, that means that I'm basically grading everything in the positive Y and negative X side of the XY axis graph. So first I would start with the bottom most piece of your pattern of the front. So I'm starting in the bottom corner in the center front bottom. I'm adding my grade lines in from the original pattern. And then once those grade lines are redrawn onto the new pattern, then I add the measurement that I've indicated my grade to be. Vertical grade lines mean that you're expanding your pattern around the circumference, and horizontal grade lines mean that you are lengthening your pattern. So you can see I've indicated the 1/4 inch circumference width that I'm going to do on the vertical one, and then I've done my 1 inch length grade of 1 inch longer. Once I've done the grade, I can then be tracing out the rest of the pieces of my pattern. I'm starting on the bottom here, so I've done the center front and the center side, the front side. Once I've done that, I can then add the center pieces, which I've already done with my grade. I'm tracing that out. It's sort of like the middle center front piece. I'm going to trace that out, and then I'm going to continue my grade line on the new pattern with that 1/4 inch space in between, indicating the larger pattern size. Also, don't forget to trace the complete piece. And do not forget to weigh down with some weight so that your pattern doesn't shift. Add the grade lines. Okay, so you see that I've put 2 grade lines here. So I have a one at the waist and then one in through the top around the sleeve. So remember that my total length increases 1 inch. So I have to disperse the 1 inch where I see necessary over those 2 grade lines. Okay, so I've done 3/4 inch and 1/4 inch. Now I'm just continuing on tracing my pattern pieces because I've already applied the necessary grade lines of the center and the length. Now I'm doing those center pieces. I've added the grade line. Now I'm continuing with my trace. So I usually complete the pattern at the neck and the top shoulder. Just keep in mind with this pattern, I am not increasing the neck at all. So there's no grade in the neck. I'm just increasing the length and the width. And I'm just sharpening up my pattern, making sure my corners are nice and sharp, and making sure all my pieces are in. These pieces are I'm still weighing them down. Make sure you weigh them down. Don't just rely on holding them down with your fingers because they can shift. And I've done my grade. You can see that I've got that 1/4 inch grade through the top, which I'm covering with my hand. And I've got the grade just completed through the waist. Again, go over your lines, make sure they're sharp, everything's connected, and make sure your corners are nice and sharp too, so there's no guessing. I'm adding a sleeve notch, an armhole notch, I should say. That's very important when we're drafting our sleeve. Add an armhole notch, it doesn't matter where. I usually put it in my grade line. Don't forget to add the seam allowance to the shoulder seam. That's very important when we're truing our sleeve. And again, label the pattern, indicate the fact that it's a front. My grain line should be actually indicating a fold, but I plan on extending this pattern and making it lay completely flat so it's a complete front. That's why I've indicated my grain line this way, but I will do the indicate on fold grain line as well, just so I don't forget. And there we have our piece. You can continue now to cut it out, and then we'll move on to the back piece. Okay, let's move on to the back. So the method is exactly the same. Start off with your XY axis. We're just repeating the same process as before. My grade lines on the back are exactly the same, but I will talk about the little differences here and there, and I will go over the grade again. So make sure that is a complete right angle. Now I'm starting off in the center back bottom center piece. I'm tracing that out. It's a little square. Okay, so these little squares I've numbered so that I know which side is which, and I haven't numbered them for a specific order, just indicates that it is indeed a piece in the corner that it's supposed to go on so that I don't get confused. And now I've added my grade line, which is 1/4 inch on the back as well. These can change. Nothing is set in stone about how much you make your grade and how the measurement of it. So that is very personal to you and your own drafting. So I'm continuing on, adding my length grade. And in the back, I believe, I've only done the grade. Well, I've split the grade up over 2 points as well. So it's 3/4 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch at the top for a total of 1 inch longer. And I'm continuing on with my pieces. I go in the same order each time so that I don't get lost and confused. And these pieces are all numbered so that I know that which side is supposed to be up. Trace it out. So this process gets quite fast. There's just a lot of tracing involved. You have to trace off your pattern and then cut it up. But I keep these already cut pieces so that I can do any type of grading if I need a larger size or a smaller size or any alterations. And again, I'm adding my shoulder seam allowance in as well. Making sure your armhole is nice and sharp, and then add those armhole notches to the back. The back armhole you indicate with 2 notches. So anything done on the back of the pattern is done with 2 notches. So cut this piece out and don't forget to label it. Now you're going to label it with the grain line on the fold. And you can see I've done sort of 2 options there. So it's on the fold or vertical, because like I indicated before, I do have the option of tracing the other side as well and having a full pattern of just the back. This would matter if you were getting your pattern made in a factory or by someone who is mass producing your clothing. So cut it out and then we'll move on to the next one. Waistband, it's pretty simple. Our waistband, again, our circumference is going to be 1 inch, okay? But because our waistband is made out of ribbing, I'm not going to grade the waistband 1 inch. I'm just going to split the difference and either maybe grade it 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. That's really up to you and the stretch of your ribbing. The ribbing I have has a lot of stretch, so I'm only going to grade it up 3/4 of an inch instead of the 1 inch. And because it's just a rectangle, pretty straightforward, we're going to cut that out. And I've just added the 3/4 of an inch onto the waistband there. And I'm just going to finish drawing that out. We're going to label that. And again, I'm going to label it as a cut flat. But you can also label indicating cut on fold as well, or just fold the piece exactly in half when you're cutting out your ribbing and using that. That's fine. But because these pieces are just random rectangle squares, they don't look like much, please make sure you label them so that they don't actually accidentally get thrown away or cut into something else. I've done it before. So this is a full complete pattern piece indicated by this grain line. Label your pattern so that you know what it is and it doesn't get thrown away accidentally. This is the waistband, and I've just come up with a name for my garment, and it's a size small. So the neckband is done exactly the same, but I'm going to turn this half a piece into a full neckband piece. So you can see how the process is pretty easy. So I just draw out 2 neckbands, and then again, my neck circumference, if you recall, is not getting larger. So there's no grade added to this, but typically a neckband grade only grades either 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch each size, so it's not a lot. But I've just basically turned my neckband from a half a piece into a full neckband pattern piece, and I've just indicated that it is that based on the grade line. Label it so you don't accidentally throw your pattern away. And label it, and we will move on to the next piece, which is the cuff. So the cuff is getting graded a size up, and typically a cuff grade, because this is very stretchy ribbing, I'm only going to grade it 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so it's not a very big grade. People's wrists don't tend to get massively huge one size up, but eventually, from going from an extra small to an extra large, my cuff circumference will have increased probably by 1 inch. So I've just done a 1/4 inch grade on my cuff. It's pretty simple because it's just a square and you just add a 1/4 inch on one side, label it, cut it out. Moving along, we are now truing our pattern. So that means, truing means that we are matching our sewing lines or sewing seams up just on the paper. First thing you want to do is true your sleeve to your armhole, and you want to indicate your seam allowance so that you know exactly where you're going to be sewing it, so the measurement's accurate. Tape it together. So pretend that we've just sewn this, right? Make sure you put the notch in on your armhole, front and back. Now grab your poker, whatever you use to walk your pattern, and walk your sleeve along the armhole. Walk it along at the seam allowance. Okay, so where the seam allowance is, not right at the edge. So I'm working from 1 centimeter in, and that's where I'm truing it, because that's exactly where I would typically be sewing it. When I get to a notch, indicate that notch with your pencil while you're going along your sleeve, because if one side's bigger or smaller, you can always remeasure based on the notch. Okay, so going through my pattern, I have a little mistake here. My sleeve is smaller than my armhole. And sometimes that happens. Maybe I made a little mistake. Maybe I did something wrong, or maybe that's just what happened. So we're going to increase the size of our sleeve using the slash and spread pattern method. Okay, so slash and spread means I've picked a point where I need to make my pattern larger, and I'm going to basically cut along that point and increase it, and just stick a little piece of paper in there and tape it. So the measurement that I need to increase my sleeve is 1/4 inch, and it's a 1/2 inch. It's actually a lot, and I have to increase each. I'm going to spread that measurement out across the sleeve. So I'm going to slash and spread in 2 points so that my sleeve is even across the whole thing. Okay, so I've taken 1/4 inch, I've drawn a 1/4 inch line on that little piece of paper I'm about to tape in. I've aligned one edge to the edge of my pattern. So I basically have like a little 1/4 inch, line, 2 lines, and in between is a 1/4 inch. I'm taping it onto my pattern, and then I'm spreading at the sleeve seam or at the armhole seam. That's where I'm spreading because that's where it needs to be larger. And then I tape the pattern closed, and then I do the same on the other side. And then what this does is it causes a little blip in your sleeve line, so you have to true the new seam. So I've drawn the new seam on with a pencil, and I'm going to cut it. So I've basically trued both seams now, because what happens, you open up a pattern and the line will be a little bit off, so we have to fix that. And what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Okay, so that's why I'm taping a little bit of piece of paper in there, and I want that line nice and smooth. This is how you do really good pattern drafting. Keeping in mind how you're sewing the thing together, not just what you're doing on the piece of paper. So let's re-walk our sleeve over our armhole to see if our new slash and spread points that we've just increased have worked. And I remember I've done it across the 2 points. I've increased the sleeve in the front and the back. Even though what was indicated was just in the back, I want to make sure it's even across. If you just increase the sleeve in the back, you'll have like a lot of fabric in the back. That's why we do this evenly across the front and the back of the sleeve. The nice thing about it is that my notches are lining up. But I might have to shift the notch in the back slightly as I go, and that's okay. That's why we don't put the notches on the sleeve until we're completely done making sure that the sleeve fits into the armhole before we continue. If you don't do a good walking along of your pattern to plan it out, you could actually get a misread. So I've actually had to do that again because I was a little sloppy and it was coming out as too short again. So I've started at the center notch, at the shoulder notch, and then I've just redone it again. And then I'm pretty sure that it'll match up now. Okay, so we've got success. Okay, my pattern's done, but you're not done yet because you still have to sew a sample to make sure that everything fits and that your size small, your new size small actually makes sense on the person who's a size small. So once you're done grading your pattern, now you can make a sample out of the new pattern, try that on, see how it fits before you continue, and you can grade this into a medium if you want. Thanks for watching.